Not that there's a big line here. We all know each other. But does anybody want to start off first?
Hi, Jamie. I can't figure out how to unmute it, how to raise my hand. It's Sharon Ryan with Windspeaker.
Yes, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good. So I do have a question for the National Chief.
Please.
Okay. She was saying that the First Nations should not be dependent on the budget cycle for investments, and that's a major departure from the way any federal government has done its budgeting. I'm wondering if she raised this concept with the finance minister when she had pre-budget conversations with her.
Thank you for the question, Sherry. I have actually always talked about a new way of building prosperity in First Nations. And in terms of our pre-budget consultations with the minister, we did really focus on the investments that we needed in this budget cycle. And as you know, Sherry, what we ended up with obviously was not what First Nations had identified as being needed. And it really made me wonder, about the budget cycle process and why the government continually asks us what our needs are and then purposefully underfunds us. And so it led me to to contemplate, what is it that we really need out of the federal government? How do we change the budget cycle process? How do we expand it? And how do we get First Nations connected to the wealth that is being generated in Canada? And what really triggered me, Sherry, was an article in the Toronto Star that talked about the $90 billion windfall that this government had as a result of, I believe, is inflation plus commodities. And of course, those commodities are being taken from First Nations lands, whether those lands are unceded or whether those lands are treaty lands. And that made me wonder what we need to do moving forward. And the idea, it's not a brand new idea that I've come up with. The idea that First Nations have to benefit from the wealth that is being generated on their lands is not a brand new concept. I just felt that when I was doing interviews and talking to the media about this, that I wanted to, say something more than just, well, those are good investments, but not enough. I mean, that's the cycle. You know it. Every reporter on this news conference knows that is the usual lines when it comes to the budget. And I just felt like, well, what are we going to do to change that? Why do we continue to talk cyclically when we can actually start to change the dynamics and have a new deal for First Nations on Turtle Island with the Canadian government, particularly?
So how do you make the federal government hear that message?
Well, they did hear it. I immediately got a call from Minister Haidu's office, and we met this morning at 10 a.m., had a really great conversation with her. And we are going to, look at some of the things that I developed as National Chief that came out of work that I've been doing my whole career. And one of them is to build a national prosperity table and to have this discussion around how do you share the wealth of this country with First Nations. And that national, it has a longer name. It's a National Economic Growth Wealth Building Prosperity Table is the longer name of it. And so Minister Haidu was really interested in that concept. And so we're going to start to figure out the path forward because, Sherry, I always talk about the healing path forward. And a part of the healing path forward is economic reconciliation. Our economies that existed prior to contact, we had economies. Let, people who wanted tell the false narrative that we didn't have economies, that we didn't have trade. Those are not true. The truth is we had economies, we had trade, we had ways to build wealth in our communities, ways to share that wealth, ways to take care of our community. We had self-governance, we had self-determination, and we need to get back to that. And so I think ultimately the most important thing about the healing path forward is economic reconciliation is a part of the whole reconciliation process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheree. Brett, do you have a question?
Hello, yes, I sure do. How's it going, everybody? National Chief, the budget proposes to replace the First Nations Land Management Act with a new piece of legislation described as the Framework Agreement on First Nation Land Management. What's your reaction to this proposed legislative change that was included in the budget?
Well, Brent, thank you for the question. I don't have all of the analysis done. Our staff are still working on a number of pieces around the analysis on the budget. And so I'd like to circle back to that question with you, but it is still tied very much to what I was just talking about land rights in Canada, particularly for First Nations, and how we are constantly, when we do have conflict in this country, it is about land and water rights. And Canada needs to finish the constitutional talks with First Nations and other Indigenous people around our place within the Confederation, so to speak, and our relationship. And so that's a part of the bigger picture moving forward.
Okay, thanks for that. So I guess I'll take it that you or the AFN wasn't consulted on this proposal to, repeal the First Nations Land Management Act and put something else in place. Were you aware that this was going to be included, or that this was thinking about, or is this news to you as well?
No, I don't think it's new. It's probably news to me as an individual. But I know that the Assembly of First Nations Secretariat has been doing a lot of work around the various tables and processes that have come, that the AFN has been involved in, and the Land Management Act is one of those. A lot of those processes that begun or started in British Columbia, for example, around taxation. And those are specific processes that I believe that we're connected to, but for me as National Chief, I still have to be briefed on it. And again, I want to circle back to you at some point and have a more deep conversation about it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for joining us. Do you have a question for National Chief from NBC?
No, I don't right now. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, it's open for anybody that does have a question for National Chief. Brett, is that you again?
Yeah, I'll have one more if I may. It was related to what the National Chief was talking about previously. The budget 2022 does propose to provide about $130 million over 5 years for Natural Resources Canada to develop a national benefit sharing framework to kind of bring First Nations into these resource-based projects. It mentions, including Indigenous participation in this critical mineral strategy. Line 3, and there's mention of Indigenous economic participation in the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I'm wondering where that kind of falls into your, policy proposal to share resource revenues.
If that proposal from the federal government means that First Nations will have ownership in the development of those resources, whether they're mines or hydro development or transmission lines, anything that is resource-based, if it means that First Nations will be owners, then I think that that's a good conversation to start having. If it means that First Nations will only have these smaller impact benefit agreements where perhaps they're allocated a number of jobs or a number of contracts that they can operate in relation to development, or maybe, you know, there are some entrepreneurial opportunities, then I think that that keeps us in the same state that we're in. We really need to grow our economies. We really need to have ownership and have net profits from these billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar projects that are happening on our lands. And so it's important that if we're going to have a conversation, then we're going to have a deep and meaningful and fulsome conversation around wealth building and not wealth sharing. So wealth building means that we own pieces of this. It means that we're on board of directors for these corporations. It means that we're shareholders. It means, you know, real wealth building and wealth sharing as well. Thank you, Brett.
Okay, anybody have a question? If not, perhaps we can, National Chief, maybe have a final word on this.
Sure. I do see Dan Jones is trying to connect to audio, so I'm not sure if he has a question. But I really appreciate these opportunities to speak with our specific media and our media outlets. You know, First Nations at this juncture in history are in a unique place that we've never been in before. So we've had recently the apology from the Pope in the Vatican, not a full apology for the church's role, but still a real apology where the Pope said, I am very sorry, and acknowledged all of the abuse and harm that was done to our children. We are, you know, also have been recovering our children, and we will be recovering our children for the many years ahead. And it's really created a sense of knowledge building within non-Indigenous communities about what has been happening to First Nations, that we have been the targets of assimilation and genocide through those institutions, which I no longer call schools. And it's created a sense of empathy and a real desire on non-Indigenous people's part to be a part of the solution. And I get asked this by many allies, what can I do? You know, how can I help? I want to be a part of the healing. I want to heal. And I think that, you know, when we look at a budget cycle like this, it doesn't necessarily align with what I'm hearing from non-Indigenous Canadians. And so I've always said to our allies, they need to be calling their MPs and their MPPs and asking, what are you doing to, you know, take us on the healing path forward with First Nations? And this is a really great opportunity to ask, what is the economic reconciliation that needs to happen? And what are you as a non-Indigenous government doing to walk that economic reconciliation and ensure that First Nations have access to wealth and prosperity so that we can reach our vision of happy, healthy children, surrounded by the love and care of their families, living in safe and vibrant communities? We have to get there, and having a strong economy is a part of that. So those are my closing comments. And I just want to say thank you, Miigwech. And again, we're going to try and have these regular interactions with Indigenous media so that we can have these conversations and you know, have more information and knowledge sharing with everyone. Miigwech.
Thank you, National Chief. Thank you, everybody. If any of the media would like to request a one-on-one with National Chief over the next week or so, please send me an email, jamiem@afn.ca. Miigwech, thank you, everybody.
Miigwech, thank you.